Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the fifth and final ad hoc committee meeting. That's at least 15 hours of meeting time and countless hours of reading and doing research and writing comments. So I think that's just a testament to the love that we have, the collective love that we have for this city, for this community. And I think it's great that we have that same drive. Depending on wherever your opinion is or your perspective on how things are, the one common denominator is that we all want our community to continue to be safe. We all want our community to continue to thrive. And I think that we are setting an example regionally for a lot of other cities. So thank you again for spending your Saturday mornings with us and for submitting your comments. So today, what we'll do is we'll review some revisions that we had to the draft and receive all of your additional ideas and suggestions so that we may finalize it and present it to the rest of the council this Wednesday. So again, thank you. I look forward to a productive conversation today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Spriggs.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for those introductory words. I really don't have much to add other than to thank everyone who has been with this process from the community all along. It's been a major time commitment, as Mayor Pro Tem said. It's been a major time commitment also for some of our key city staff members, led by City Manager Andy Hall, who's spent a tremendous amount of time working on this, going back and forth with drafts. Mayor Pro Tem and I have made lots of edits and inputs, etc., in the drafts, as have our consultants. So this has been a true team project involving the core team and the community team. And it's all driven by a desire for a better Imperial Beach and a recognition that we're all neighbors. We're in this community. We're going to be in this community. We need to live in a community that has the best possible services of all kinds that we can provide. That's why we run for office, and we're on the city council. Including and especially law enforcement and public safety. So going forward, I hope everyone will keep in mind that those are our core values, and that we will respect each other's different perspectives and views as we've been all along. We've been doing a good job of that, and I know it will continue through this meeting as we review our final draft before we go to City Council. So with that, I guess Andy Hall will get us started with the presentation, unless there's another more comments from the folks who've been working on this.
Thank you, Councilman Spriggs. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I just wanted to go over a little bit of the structure for today's meeting. I think you've probably become familiar with Zoom meetings, but just in case we have a few people that are joining for the first time, people are admitted to the meeting and placed on mute, and their video is turned off until they are called on to speak or ask a question. There's also an opportunity at times for you to unmute yourselves, and sometimes that happens accidentally. So if we have missed you and for some reason we get some background noise, we would ask you to mute yourself. That helps these meetings flow a little bit more consistently, and we would appreciate that. At the time when the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs want to take questions, that has been a little bit confusing for some people. We would ask you to use the raise your hand icon on Zoom. And the way you do that is you go to your menu bar and press participants. And under the participants screen, there is a icon to raise your hand. If you do that, the city clerk realizes that you want to ask a question, and she will state your name and ask you to ask your question. If you happen to be on the phone, *9 does the same thing. That will notify the city clerk that you have a question, and she can then put you in the queue. And when your name comes up, she will read the last 3 digits of your phone number. So anyway, and then again, just that last bullet there, these Zoom meetings have become somewhat routine for a lot of people, but there's always a few surprises when we're going through these electronic meetings, and a few things get cut out, and sometimes screens freeze and a few things like that. So be patient, and we really appreciate you being here this morning. Wanted to also thank our consulting team. I think if you've been on for a few minutes and they've tested their microphones, we both have Dr. Keisha Clark and Mr. Mike Gray with us this morning. I would imagine after my short presentation, the Mayor Pro Tem may give them an opportunity to share some of their thoughts about where we are and what we've accomplished and what we have yet to do. So just wanted to make sure to recognize them and thank them for their efforts. Before I start with this summary of previous actions, I've had a few questions about just exactly what this report is, and I want to be pretty clear. This is the ad hoc committee's report to the City Council. This is not a citizen's report. This is not a staff report. It is not a consultant's report. The Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs used the input that they received from residents, from the staff, from their consultants to prepare a report to present to the City Council. And that's the ad hoc committee is literally the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs. They are a subset of the full council. This is an ad hoc committee of the council. This is not a community committee or anything like that. And there's been some questions. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that nuance in the process. But as you know, we started this process with a report that was due to the City Council 90 days after the ad hoc committee was formed, and that ad hoc committee was formed on June 17th. And so we are planning to take it to the council next Wednesday, September 16th, which is a 90-day process. We started with a city financial overview, and then we did the current contract with the Sheriff's Department. Then we looked at the use of force policies. And so those were the first three meetings, was kind of gathering some data, getting input from the community, and then we prepared the initial draft, and then today is a review of the final draft. And just in case we have a few people that haven't joined us all along, I will quickly, and I'll try to keep it really short, go over the previous draft, and then concentrate more on the changes from the first draft to the second draft for comments for today's meeting. So as you can see, I just talked a little bit about that. We looked at the financial framework of the city and reviewed the sheriff's contract. We also looked at some alternative services and some things that are happening. I think most of you or some of you may have read in the newspaper this week even, La Mesa is looking at some unique alternatives and maybe trying to do some different types of policing in their community. So we tried to take a look at some of those things. We discussed some of the findings and alternatives and created an initial draft. And now we're reviewing the draft of the report from the ad hoc committee to the City Council. So real quick in today's agenda, we're just going to review that draft, and then we're going to really concentrate on the modifications, and then open it up for any community comments or discussion. So a quick overview, some of the topics that were assigned when the ad hoc committee was formed. The City Council asked them to look at a few specific areas. One was the fiscal impact on the budget, and then also an examination of both the policies and practices of the use of force from the San Diego Sheriff's Department. And then also an exploration of some different community policing models and structures that might help us be more effective and efficient in Imperial Beach. From there, we moved to an overview of the general fund expenditures in Imperial Beach. And you can see here are the major expenditures in our city and how that happens. And that is all in the report, and anyone can refer to that for more detail. We also looked at how we compare with other cities. There was some comparison of not only all the cities in the county, but also beach cities, because there are some distinction between beach cities and the inland cities in the county. And then one of the things we wanted to look at, were the results of the Racial and Identity Profiling Act here in San Diego County. And so we started to get some information about at least the county results based on race. And this is the overall county report. And so we took a look at that. Again, this is in the report, which is available. I think if you signed up today, you probably received an email with the report attached. So feel free to look at this in more detail if you would like. Oops, let me go back. So one of the new things that have been added, Dr. Clark provided us with some information about the San Diego County officer-involved shootings from 2000 to 2012. And you can see here by year at the top of the screen how many people were involved in officer-involved shootings. Then they broke that down by the race, people killed in officer-involved shootings, and you can see there the statistics by race. And then that was expanded to include both jail population and speeding tickets issued. So it kind of looked at things across the spectrum from officer-involved shootings and killings to jail populations and speeding tickets issued. So that is also in the report and has been added since last time. So I wanted to make sure that people were aware that that is one of the additions. The second part of that, of course, was to take a closer look at our region by city. And I pulled that out a little bit because the information is quite small. I apologize for that, on the right-hand side of your screen. So I pulled it out for the Imperial Beach arrests. And again, this was 2012 per 10,000 people. And Imperial Beach, there were 518 total arrests. Per 10,000 people, that would be 833 arrests per 10,000 people for Black residents. You can see 645 for white residents, and then other is 128. And for the definitions, you can see there in the bottom of the screen, it defines how they came up with those different categories. So again, that is one of the additions to the report since the last time it was presented. On the next few slides, some of the language that was refined has been added in red. And so it makes it a little easier to read. So when we were talking about the community best practices, there's been a few clarifications made. You can see on the third bullet point there, and rather than go through all the bullets, again, this is in the report, but there was rather than just commit to resources and implement community policing, it's important that community policing include adequate training. We want to make sure that the people that are placed in our community to keep people safe or to deal with different situations in the community have the right kind of training. And then the reconcile with the community was expanded to make sure that that is through unstructured quarterly meetings, informal opportunities for people to come and share their ideas or share their concerns or even their experiences, so that we can continue to improve the law enforcement here in Imperial Beach. Moving to use of force best practices, you can see there some of the changes, and I think a lot of those were for accountability. So again, when you're looking at the use of force, making sure to create accountability measures. That seems to be really important, to make sure that we don't just say it. I think the conversation last week and conversation that I've heard from the ad hoc committee is that we just want to make sure that in addition to having great policies, we want to make sure that we have great practices as well. And then, of course, we moved on and we looked at a little bit at alternative policing models. The one in particular that we looked at, again, given the nature of the ad hoc committee and the short time frame that we had to review, we were only able to look at one in any sort of detail, and that was the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon. And so we took a look at that. Again, that is in your report, and probably those of you that have been on in the other meetings have seen this before. But what we did add is that Dr. Clark, in some of her work, has been able to study in more detail some of the other additional models and structures that we did not at this point have time to look at, that perhaps going forward the city can continue to look at. Things like mobile crisis response teams, restorative justice, the mediation, community patrols, and even what we might call CEPTED, which is basically the way you build your community and making sure you do it with safe lighting and cameras and the way the neighborhoods are designed. Lots of times that can create safer communities. A shift in budget towards recreation and general operations, making sure that we look at law enforcement as being all-inclusive of all of our departments, that recreation or public works or lifeguards, all of those have something to do with the community safety. And then further study of alternative policing measures. And there was again, I mentioned a little bit earlier that La Mesa is considering some different type of structure to deal with the homelessness in their community. So I won't go through these, but I wanted to let everyone know that as an attachment, the full definitions of some of the things that we've been talking about will be added to the report, because some of these terms may be new to some people. So I appreciate, again, Dr. Clark providing us with some more full definitions of what some of these things mean, because we've heard a lot of terminology in this report that might be new to some people. And so there are a couple pages of definitions, this page and the next one, that will help people understand exactly what we're talking about when they hear some of the terminology that's been used in the report. So we'll make sure to include that as a definitions attachment to the report. One of the things that we were asked to look at was, and this has now been included in the report, and this is new since last time, is expanded use of community service officers. And so in the report, you will see that we have provided a job description of what the county uses for the hiring of community service officers. And I was also asked to include information about what that looks like financially. You can see the bullet points in the bottom. A sworn deputy from the county, they do charge the city about just shy of $200,000 for a sworn deputy and about $86,000 for a community service officer. There was a lot of discussion in one of the meetings, and so I was also asked to pull out what the actual salary range is. So even though it would cost the city $86,000 for a community service officer, the salary is actually between $37,000 and $46,000. And the actual salary range for a deputy sheriff is between $65,000 and $108,000. And so you can see that total compensation is a very different number than the actual salaries of these employees. And I thank Councilman Spriggs for asking me to expand on that a little bit, because it can be a little bit confusing. One thing I would say is this does not include overhead costs. These are total compensation. This is what it costs to have the employee. And then there are some additional overhead costs associated with the Sheriff's Department. And then there were some minor modifications to some of the committee findings, so I wanted to go over those. And the first one here is the guiding finding, what the ad hoc committee wanted us to add, and the level of community support for. So it reads, while the accomplishments of and the level of community support for the Sheriff's Department in Imperial Beach are undeniable, there remains room for improvement. So it has been clear through this process that from many, many sides, probably all sides, there's an appreciation for what our Sheriff's Department does in this community, and that they definitely put their lives on the line to try to keep all of us safe. And so there was a recognition that there's a lot of community support, regardless of some of the things that maybe, there's always room for improvement in any situation, but we do appreciate the fact that there's been a lot of statements of community support for our Sheriff's Department who do their very best to keep us safe. There were no changes, but I wanted to make sure that people understood that then there were some specific findings. The previous slide, this one is actually a guiding finding, and then there were some specific ones, and that is the impact of the contract of the Sheriff's Department. So you can see those there. That did not change from the last meeting. There were some we wanted to make sure to clarify a few things on the use of force findings. So in addition to talking about pointing, which is could include both tasers or a firearm, and detaining, which is typically handcuffing, they wanted to make sure that curbing, which has been brought up by some of our residents, was included in some of the use of force policies and practices. And they wanted to make sure that the reason they're doing this is not to put officers in harm's way, but we do want to make sure to ensure the dignity of any of the detainees and keep them preserved. And maybe there's some other strategies that they could do in either in addition or in replacement of curbing. And then with some of the data that was provided, you can see at the bottom there was another finding included, which was that countywide data indicate that people of color, particularly Black residents in Imperial Beach and elsewhere, are more likely to receive harsher treatment across a variety of types of encounters with law enforcement. And that comes from the earlier graphic that I had showed that was added to the presentation since our last meeting. On the alternative policing models, wanted to make it clear that identifying, planning, and implementing significant changes, it's a longer-term effort. That takes, as we talked about earlier, additional training. Training, by the way, not just of those involved. So you can see here at the bottom of the screen, proper response will require community education of when to use 911 and when to use non-emergency dispatch services, but also training for dispatchers and probably for the deputy sheriffs, as well as if the city chooses to go with some alternative policing, as well as the other people knowing when and where and what their role is. That becomes very important. So recommendation 1 and recommendation 2 were combined, and so there's a bit of a change, and trying to redline that became a little bit challenging. So I put it all in red, and I'll just read it real quick because it does read a little bit differently. So recommendation 1 reads, allow the ad hoc committee to remain in place and to continue the heretofore constrained data collection effort, which is essential for effective analysis and oversight. B, engage in ongoing constructive dialogue with the Sheriff's Department. C, continue the conversation with residents and their experiences over a longer period of time. And D, establish a forum that will allow residents that fear retribution or other fears due to filing complaints against the actions of any member of the San Diego County Sheriff's Department to bring their concerns forward. The work of the ad hoc committee has been fast-paced, interesting, and beneficial to the city, residents, and the Sheriff's Department. So I just wanted to point out that recommendation has not changed in substance, but it certainly has changed in wording. Recommendation number 2 is now the Code of Conduct recommendation, and there was an addition to that recommendation that deputy training and active simulation should be included for deputies in Imperial Beach. Recommendation number 3 remained the same, and that is the implementation of best practices for use of force and community policing. Recommendation number 4, there was, and this is discussing the alternative policing models, and there was an addition that states staff should be directed to meet with the Sheriff's Department on a quarterly basis to discuss San Diego County programs that can be implemented in Imperial Beach. Staff has had some of those discussions with the Sheriff's Department. They do believe that there are some programs in the county that can be used to benefit Imperial Beach. And so they are open to that. And so we want to take advantage of that, meet with them on a regular basis. And then recommendation number 5 did not change. And then there was a new recommendation added that states the County Board of Supervisors should allocate resources to increase municipalities' access to county-driven programs that will offset the San Diego County Sheriff's Department response to non-emergency calls, and for additional training, such as work with San Diego County Office of Race and Equity. So that recommendation was added. With that, I will turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem to see how she would like to proceed, if she would like to have comments from our consultants, or whether you'd like us to move straight into public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I'd like to give the opportunity to our consulting team to share their thoughts or comments if they have any.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Andy for, weathering this whole, as Mayor Pro Tem and council members talked about, the back and forth, the several drafts, the additions, the comments, and pulling all of it together. I think as he reviewed that and the new changes, I was jotting down and thinking about like more of a macro view of what he was talking about. And it brings to mind a quote that I heard about. It's about relationships at the core of this. This is really a social issue. I was looking at the stats that were provided from 2012, and that was 8 years ago of data, and showing that Blacks and other people of color are disproportionately affected by law enforcement practices. We're 8 years later, and so we can think about that was 8 years ago. That might be not present data. I think we're seeing it more. Everyone can agree on that it's being filmed and it's on our local news. And so it's not just statistics on a piece of paper or data in a database. It is images that we're seeing. And in the report, if you read in the forward, I talked about even if these things, maybe you might see these horrific things not happening in the community of Imperial Beach, they're happening elsewhere. And that means that it can happen there as well. Or it could be happening and was not filmed. And so, of course, injustice anywhere is just the responsibility of our leaders and us as leaders to do something about that. And so at the core of this, if you look at some of the trainings that I recommended, it's really social issues to get to the underpinning of what the outcome is, right? That we have the symptoms and we have the actual disease, right? So we have to get to the root of the problem. And so relationships, not programs. That quote I was thinking about, it's about relationships. And so it's important that we have these conversations together like we have. And I've also recommended that we can't leave law enforcement out of the conversation. We can't make plans for them, create programs, alternative policing models without them. Because guess what? When they take off of that uniform, they're us. They're citizens and residents as well. They have families, and they want their families to enjoy what we all want as a community, to enjoy safe, clean neighborhoods, recreational activities, and the thought about having unstructured and informal, like a neighbor. You go out, you take out your trash, and you say hello. You notice your neighbor forgot to take out their trash. My neighbor does it for me. And I'm like, oh gosh, thanks. I didn't take this out to the curb. Someone did it for me. And so it can't always happen in these kinds of settings that we begin to talk about these kinds of things and come up with solutions and brainstorm. It has to be in some organic and natural environments, because frankly, we have to have this formalized, structured environment for a lot of things. And we can take off our resident citizen neighbor hat and get into all of the distractions that can keep us from the real answers. And so I'd like to see us, even in these meetings we've had, I think we had someone that spoke from a law enforcement lens that was on the call before. But I would have liked to see that they were a part of this, a larger part of us talking about what are the solutions. And so we can get rid of the us versus them. You know, law enforcement needs to do this, but that they're here as a resident, as a neighbor, with families too, and being seen as human and behind the uniform. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that was honest, truthful, transparent, and authentic in the communications that we've had. That is something that is really important to me, and that I talk about a lot in my work, that we not wait for the weekend to take off of everything and become human, you know, and become neighborly and become nice and able to come to solutions together. That we're able to do that in those 9 to 5 or whatever hours we work during the day, that we bring I'm a neighbor, I'm a resident, I'm a community member to the table. And if we can do that, we can work together. we can work together. So I think that is all I'm going to say at this time regarding the review. So thanks so much for including me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. Mr. Gray?
I would like to echo Dr. Clark's recognition of the work that Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Spriggs and City Manager Andy Hall have done. They have been very vested in this process and the meetings that I've had with all of you, all y'all, or as we say in New York, yous guys. It's been a great part of the process to see everybody talking and sharing, and everybody comes from a different perspective. And one of the things that came up in a recent law enforcement review board. So I'm part of the board, the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, that looks at cases and complaints that come to the board from the Sheriff's Department and from the Probation Department. And one of the things that in generalities that I can talk about is a case that came across, not from Imperial Beach, because there hasn't been a complaint to the board in over a year from the city of Imperial Beach. But it was a case where there was no video camera footage, there was no body cam footage, and there was a discussion as to what point do we say, a community member was complaining that, hey, this community member who's complaining is absolutely correct, and the deputy is very wrong, which is a total flip from the past where the officers were always right and the community members who are complaining were always wrong. And so part of my discussion in that was, well, we can't let the pendulum swing so far from one side to the other. We have to find a middle ground, if you will. We have to have, and Dr. Clark said it well, we have to have these discussions because they're relationships. So we have to be cognizant that the pendulum may have been on one side for a long time, but we can't let it swing so far to the other side that we make it disproportionate to another group of people, that we have to find that middle ground. We have to look at the facts as objectively as we possibly can. We all come to the table with our different viewpoints, our different histories, how we grew up, the communities we grew up in, and we have to, and we all have a different view on the world from our own personal relationships. I can look at my own family, and every one of my siblings has married someone from a different country or a different ethnic background than what we are from. And it really kind of opens your world when you see that. And I think we have to look at that and say, okay, what is our community? What does our community look like? How do we want it to look? What do we want law enforcement's role to be in there? And how do we, integrate some new, as Andy Hall talked about in his presentation this morning, how do we integrate some new concepts within that and find that middle ground with everybody? And I think that's part of what I see this committee doing is really looking for, how do we serve the community better? And so what I've done is I've really looked at some of the data that's come out of the Sheriff's Department. I've had a couple interviews with command staff, and some of the data that, and their openness and willingness to talk has been very, very high, very good. There's a lot of information that is not drilled down specific to Imperial Beach, and I think they want to do that. And I think in the future you'll see some things that are going to be more specific to cities and the data that come from the cities. So as we look at this, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, yes, I have a law enforcement background. Yes, I work with some of the cities in a number of areas, and I'm trying to say, okay, what's our objective here? The bottom line is everybody that's on this call this morning and has been on the meetings, your main objective is to make the community safer and better for each community member. I always looked at my role in life is how do I make the lives of the citizens of the state of California better through the work that I do? How does each individual citizen get a better life out of that? And I think that's what, keeping in mind what this ad hoc committee is doing, is exactly that. And we all have different opinions on how that's going to be done. And I'm sure when you go back to the city council next week with a report, there's going to be discussion and different viewpoints. And I always come back to, well, what's our mutual purpose in all of this? And so if we take that raw data that we've gotten from the Sheriff's Department, look at the service that's currently being done within the community, and then try to capture that within a report, there's going to be nuances that might be missed, and there might be data that might look different than what it really purports to be. So I think it's important for the community members, I think it's important for the council members, and for the city staff to look at it with a very objective eye, and to keep all that in mind as to, again, what's our mutual purpose in all of this, to make it better for our citizens, the citizens of Imperial Beach. So that's enough from me for now. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Undoubtedly, we want to achieve a point where we do this together, right? It's instead of us versus them mentality, working with our deputies, working with the department, and with the feedback that we've received from our community. It's interesting because I was, even though we began this process saying that this was going to be very exclusively focused on Imperial Beach, there are other cities around the country that are undergoing similar processes as we have undergone recently. I was part of a town hall community meeting with Council Member Will Jawando of Montgomery County in Maryland. And very different city. They're about, like, the county's about 1.5 million people. But what was interesting is that they identified a lot of similarities of what we've identified thus far. But one of the interesting concepts that they raised, that they came up with, because they also produced a report and with recommendations, was giving incentives for their deputies to live in the city or cities within the county limits. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool concept, in the sense of, they are literally integrated within the community. And just going back to what Dr. Clark was mentioning about neighborly behaviors and relationships, my hope is that, that this will be an ongoing process, and that we integrate our deputies into these conversations so that we have a unified approach to the same goal that we all want, as I mentioned earlier, which is to have a safe city that continues to thrive. So thank you very much for your comments to our consulting team. Jackie, do we have folks in the queue that would like to give comment?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre. So members of the public, let me remind you that if you would like to speak, please use the raise your hand feature, which can be accessed after pressing the participants button on your screen. You will be given 3 minutes, so please be concise in your comments. I will be keeping time and will alert you when your time is up. Okay, so we have several speakers wanting to speak. The first person is Leonard Miranda. Mr. Miranda, please unmute yourself and begin.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, listen, I'm going to talk fast because there's a lot of information I want to throw in here, but on the onset, I want to really make it clear that there are several statements in this report that I disagree with, that are seemingly portrayed as fact without real substantial evidence or data. And clearly, we don't have the time in this format to go over these items one by one, but I am available to work through them one by one with any members of the ad hoc committee or the consultants themselves. And absent that opportunity, then I think it would be fair and accurate to state that the report, in that report, that there are citizens that participated in this meeting and in these conference Zoom calls that disagree with the components of this report. So absent that opportunity, I think it'd be really fair to state that people within this forum do not agree with some of the statements made in this report. One of the main questions that's still unclear is, again, how prevalent these issues are. And they've touched on it a little bit, that it doesn't seem to be very prevalent. But at the onset, it seemed like it was real prevalent. So I think some good progress was made there. But I think as a society, we've come a long way, and policing has too, and we've made tremendous strides in identifying and speaking out against actual racism and hate. In fact, I'd say we're doing better than ever and we should continue to strive, but we will come short of perfection. But based off the data, it doesn't seem to be a systemic issue, and anyone can go to Google and Google, hate crimes in San Diego. The most recent stats that I saw for 2018, 2 years ago, was that there was 43 hate crimes that were based off race, and that wasn't just blacks, that's all races, out of the 3.3 million people that live here. So that is something to be applauded. That is something that really shows that we've made great strides, and is something that I think puts in perspective that it's a real minor, it's not a minor issue, it's an important issue. We should seek for perfection, but the stats don't bear out that it's systemic, and that's contrary to the national narrative in many areas. The last point I want to squeeze in here is that in that report, there's a recommendation for training for police deputies to have training in Black Lives Matter. I disagree with that concept until we can identify what that really means. Just 2 days ago, I was listening to KUSI, and there was a gentleman named Leo Terrell, a prominent black civil rights attorney who's worked in Los Angeles for over 30 years. And he said regarding Black Lives Matter, quote, "Black Lives Matter is nothing more than a profiteering organization that has hijacked the Democratic Party." Now, this is just 2 days ago. And Black Lives Matter, he also said, is an extremist organization that does not represent mainstream blacks. And Terrell is only one of many prominent black figures speaking out against Black Lives Matter. And with regards to that training for the deputies, I really think that it's the citizens that need training about to know your rights, don't fight the police, that it's against the law to resist arrest. If we knew those concepts, George Floyd, Rashard Brooks, Jacob Blakes, and most other criminal suspects that are lifted up by Black Lives Matter would most likely be alive today. So that's all I'm going to say on that. My time's probably up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miranda. The next speaker is Martha Sullivan. Please unmute yourself and begin. Ms. Sullivan?
I'm here. This is Martha Sullivan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to use my time to comment on the report and not reply to the last person that I really disagree with. I am the daughter of 27-year FBI, career FBI, who retired at the level of assistant director. I bought my retirement home here in Imperial Beach a year ago, a little over a year ago. I've been very involved in getting the ballot measure on the City of San Diego ballot this November for an independent police commission. So I say that just as a background for my comments on this draft report. And I found it very informative. I found my previous participation a couple of meetings ago informative. That said, I'd like to emphasize, I'm not sure it's clear in the report, in the recommendations, that the City of Imperial Beach should specifically be asking the Sheriff's Department to collect data by city that it serves. The Sheriff's Department is serving cities that it provides law enforcement services to, and it should be responsive to those customers. So far, it doesn't sound like it has been, and it's kind of shocking to me that that's the case. I also would like to encourage in talking about resources that can be supported and emphasized rather than police resources, that we add food, housing, and employment services, particularly as we struggle with this pandemic that has impacted so many more people relative to their ability to buy food and other needs that they have, their ability to afford their housing, and emit disruption to their employment. I'd also like to recommend that Imperial Beach, the city, specifically ask and involve the county supervisor for this area to be a bridge to the sheriff. I recognize that the sheriff is an elected official, but the county supervisor for this area can certainly be a major factor in trying to facilitate this. And finally, I would just like to make the point. I very much recognize that law enforcement personnel put their lives on the line every day. But I want to make the point, particularly now, that many other workers also do that. I mean, cashiers at our grocery stores are putting their lives on their line every day now with COVID. So let's just recognize that most workers are putting their lives on the line to serve their community, including, garbage collectors, utility line workers. So let's just, ease off on the police put their lives on the line every day. A lot of workers put their lives on the line every day. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Mr. Bruce Nichols. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. My principal concerns were with the charts and our payments. I don't agree at all with what Mr. Miranda said, but I won't go into all that. I grabbed a chart off of SanDiegoCounty.gov, and this is from the County of San Diego Human Resources Management System, and it's the pay schedule for sheriff's deputies from basic deputy sheriff up through lieutenant. And I was trying to understand the amount of overhead or other costs that we're paying above and beyond the salary of sheriff's deputies. If you take the patrol deputy, for instance, the lowest sheriff's deputy, step 1, step 2, makes $65,261.30. The highest makes $108,290. And so we're paying anywhere from 2 times to roughly 1 time the cost of a sheriff's deputy. If you were to normalize that at the median of $80,000, we're paying an additional $110,000 to San Diego County Sheriff's Department. And that just continues throughout this chart, which you find on page 8. And so, what I'm striving for is a better understanding of what those costs are, because we also pay, additional cost for overhead for vehicles and the rest of it. If this is a non-negotiable cost that we're paying to San Diego County Sheriff's Department, because in fact they are operating in a monopolistic fashion, then we ought to be aware of that. But if we're not, and there's a negotiation that can be had to give us more leverage or more room to better manage our community budget, then I think that needs to be included and understood by people who are part of this decision. Because quite frankly, reducing the amount of sheriff's deputies isn't necessary, isn't something we should do, and drawing from other departments, such as the fire department, isn't something we should do. If we can negotiate a better price with San Diego County Sheriff's deputies, we should, and we should understand what it is that we're paying above and beyond the deputies' salaries. And that, again, I'm happy to provide the report to anybody, but it's available at San Diego County Human Resources Management System, and we ought to just look into that. I mean, it's 2.5 times somebody's salary going into the sheriff's department is exorbitant, excessive. So that's my point, and I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. The next speaker is Lance Rogers. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Good morning. Thank you. I just want to echo Ms. Sullivan's points earlier. I agree. The thing that I just find really disappointing, and I hope that we can get better at, is just the participation from the sheriffs. We're here talking about the sheriffs. Everything is, about, data that folks are pulling from the internet and, things that we're trying to find through other sources and through consultants, through third-party consultants. We're here talking about the sheriffs and law enforcement, of whom we pay $6 million, and it represents over a third of all of the money we pay in taxes. And, we all committed our time this morning. I'm sure we're all busy and would like to be doing other things. And I'm not sure who is here from the sheriff's department. I look in the report and I think, the sentence that jumps out at me is the constrained data collection effort in recommendation number 1. I think that's, kind of a very nice way of saying that, over the months that this group has been attempting to get information, we have not received all of the information that's necessary to make these findings and to participate and to collaborate. And I find that really disappointing. I don't know if we need, a supervisor to intervene and help us get information from, our largest service provider, or what it's going to take. I mean, it seems like we're going to renew the contract. So I'm not sure if a monopolistic term, is the right fit, but it does kind of feel that way, that, we don't have any other options. So I don't know how it is that we get anything other than just boots on the ground, I guess, from the sheriffs. And it seems to me that, their lack of showing up, maybe sends the message that they're not willing to change, that they have no interest in alternative policing models. But again, I hope the committee goes forward, and I hope we can figure out a way to compel, or just in some way get more participation from them, because, how are we supposed to make these decisions without information? That's just, what I'm thinking about. But I think the group's done a great job, and hopefully it'll continue forward. Thank you.
The next speaker is Steve Futterman. Please go ahead. Mr. Futterman?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Mr. Miranda. He took a unpopular, in this environment that was very unpopular, but it took a lot of courage to say what he said. Black Lives Matter is firmly anti-Semitic. The organization, Black Lives Matter, the organization, there has to be a distinction. They are an unabashed anti-Semitic organization. I would reference everybody on this call to do the research themselves. But with all due respect to Dr. Clark, you're misrepresenting the environment that the data represents over the last 8 years. And I would recommend to everybody on this call, take a look at the most recent data, which goes, I think, between 2018 and 2019. And you'll find that the data closely aligns. So we know what we see on TV, Dr. Clark. But you know what? This is a distortion. It's just one view of everything that's TV, and that's a conscious decision made by media groups. Everybody knows that we have a problem with policing, but this is broad. But you seem to want, truth matters, Dr. Clark, and you seem to want to be imposing this postmodern thought on the rest of us here in this town and determine which way you're going to move us through this process. You want to make this only about race, and that's not fair. This is not a racist town. We have a racist in this town. We have problems. And I think this has become extremely political. And Councilwoman Aguirre and Councilman Spriggs, you should know better than this is not the way this process should be playing out. And then finally, to the city manager, I would suggest, how much are we paying for the services of Dr. Clark and the other consultant? Thank you.
Okay, before we go to the last speaker, I want to remind the public that if you want to speak, you can access the raise your hand feature by pressing the participants button. And there is a caller. If you would like to speak, just press *9. So the last speaker is Mark Williams. Please unmute yourself and begin. Oh, where did he go?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm here. You said unmute. I did. I paid attention.
Okay, please go ahead.
Good morning. I have two problems with the report. The first problem I have is the part about the Imperial Beach dictating to the police their behavior. Again, we're a small city, as I pointed this out before, and we should not even pretend to discuss the use of police force exclusively in Imperial Beach. This is a countywide, statewide, nationwide issue. That's how it should be addressed. So everybody has the same rules, whether they're in Borrego Springs, Boulevard, or in Imperial Beach. And so I'll end it at that one. I mean, it's just unrealistic and maybe dangerous to both civilians as well as the police. And then the second thing is, I'm a little offended that Marcus Boyd's emails all got put in there, but yet I sent emails about interaction with the sheriff, and I included these even in my verbal comments. None of this was included in the report. Now, admittedly, I'm not bashing the police like Marcus Boyd did in every one of his responses and how this bias of this report appears. I'm putting in positive about the police because you know what? We may have a police issue, but it's a small issue compared to the good they do. And yet this report wants to suggest that all the police are bad people. And that's just not right. That's unfair and unrealistic. I think Steve Futterman and the first speaker both nailed it right. It's not only the police, it's also how the community responds and reacts to the police. And we need to train our community participants as well on how to behave and how to fight the battle and what their rights really are. I'll end it at that. Thank you.
Okay, we got more speakers. The next one is Jack Stanzel. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Neighbors, thanks for hearing me out. I'll be real short because Mr. Miranda, Mr. Futterman, Mr. Williams stole pretty much all of my talking points. Thanks, neighbors, for being engaged in your community. I'd just like to say that I also don't appreciate speaking in absolutes on the law enforcement and their motives for doing things and videos being captured and that being causative for or definitive for a problem that we may have here in Imperial Beach. I also would like the question answered as to how much this ad hoc committee is costing the taxpayers of Imperial Beach. We spoke at the beginning about the continuance of this ad hoc committee. We're going to keep it going forward. I've got no problem with that. I love study and the conglomeration of data to empirically prove whether there is a problem or not. But I want to know what it's costing me as a taxpayer. So that question keeps coming up. And it keeps not getting answered. So if we have that, I would like to have that put out in open forum so we'd know how much this committee is costing all of us. Thanks to everybody for all their hard work. Really appreciate it, and see you around town.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Paul Lasso. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I did want to point out that in some of the data that was shared in the report, it actually does show that there are plenty of symptoms of systematic racism here in San Diego County. Just for example, Black and Indigenous people of color are disproportionately represented in the number of police arrests and killings, and it's all right there, especially with comparisons with the actual percentage of population they make up. And this has been documented for quite some time, even by the Union Tribune. They did a whole big expose in hoping that the Sheriff's Department would reform themselves internally, and that hasn't happened. I think it's really great that we are trying to solicit the participation of the Sheriff's Office, because we do have to make sure that they get to put in some kind of input. But I also don't think that we can expect cooperation or necessarily even take them on their word. Included in the report is the fact that the Sheriff's Office has refused to work with multiple cities that have asked to negotiate the cost of increasing their contract, like the cost of their contract. In light of the falling revenues due to the COVID epidemic, we know that lots of cities are going broke because there's not enough tax revenue. And knowing this, the Sheriff's Office still refused to even waive some of those cost increases, which kind of shows where their priorities are. They're looking out for themselves and not necessarily for the community at large. So yeah, we can solicit their help, but we shouldn't necessarily expect that they are going to meet us in the middle even. And I think that we need to kind of go into those conversations sober. I also don't, I would like to have some kind of commentary or discussion, on as we continue to move with this process about how much money taxpayers are spending on lawsuits for police brutality and for police misconduct, because it's been reported that it's already been over $2 million here in San Diego County in 2020. I'm pretty sure that IB does contribute to that fund. And so just as a reminder to the last caller, that all of us taxpayers here in IB have probably spent more money on police misconduct this year alone than we have on the ad hoc committee. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Marcus Boyd. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, good morning. I like to first thank of course, the city staff. I realized every day that goes into this ad hoc committee, I realize more and more how much work that goes into doing it. The report was, I thought, very thoughtful. It was not one-sided, as some may have alluded. It was down the road. It actually included the word all. So it has everybody included, even the people that have been marginalized, ignored, and brutalized by the sheriffs, and now not ignored. I encourage people that are blaming the victim that is a lost argument, and you really should rethink your strategy on that, and maintaining the status quo with that kind of argument is going to lose ground repeatedly. I also wanted to thank Paloma and Ed Spriggs. You guys have done something that takes a lot of courage, and to stand up for those who are being oppressed and to recognize everybody's concern is really unheard of. There's a lot of push against it. There's people that are very articulate about it. But it eventually doesn't make sense if you really look at the evidence. I'd like to just state, based on my personal attacks, that I am a 17-year resident and business owner and employer of Imperial Beach. I've called the sheriffs more times than probably everybody on this call, for the protection of you and your families, because it's not mine, I see people everywhere else doing things. So when I call them, I expect them to do their job. And now when I record them, people act like that's a problem. That's very funny. It's not a problem. It's legal. So stop telling people that it's a problem when it's legal. Now, I am a very busy person. I own 2 businesses. I raised a daughter that is now in UCSD and 4.0, and I was her everyday tutor. Now, I don't have time to do, I'm not broke. I'm not running around the streets without anything to do. When I open a camera and I record a police officer, it's for his safety and theirs, because we don't have access to those recordings. And when they don't perform well, I'm going to show people. I have 20 times more recordings where they did a fantastic job, and I'd like to state that now. No, I haven't mentioned it. And the reason I haven't mentioned it was because that's not why we were here today. We're not here to talk about how well they do. We were here to talk about any problems that might be there. And just because I recognized them, I'm being attacked by people
Mr. Boyd,
as the
your time
messenger.
is up.
And I'd like that to stop. You guys have a great day.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, everyone that raised their hand had an opportunity to speak. There is a person who wants to speak again, but I'll leave that up to you.
I believe Mr. Hall wanted to share some thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. There were a couple questions that I thought I should probably address. First and foremost, I do appreciate that there were some comments about whether or not everyone's comment would be included in the report. I do apologize. We are going to transcribe every one of the comments that we have received in this process, and it will be part of the report. It'll actually be the first attachment to the report. The city clerk is working on that. So anybody who's made a comment in any of these meetings, we've tried to capture those word for word, and they will be included as part of the report. So just want to make sure that everyone understands that. The only reason it wasn't included in the report today is that it does contain several hundred pages, and we wanted to make sure to capture the comments that we've received this morning as well. So we want to make sure that everyone is aware that that'll be happening. Also wanted to make sure, I think that there's some comments, and I want to make sure that everyone realizes that, you know, we work very closely with the sheriffs every day, and we've had an opportunity to talk to them about a lot of these things, and they have been able to provide us with the data that they have. Again, a lot of the data that that people have been seeking is not readily available. That's not the way that they have collected the data heretofore. But in the time that we've been having these meetings, the Sheriff's Department is trying to collect data in a different manner and be able to share that with the ad hoc committee. So I want to make sure that everyone does know that we have had a chance to engage with the Sheriff's Department. I work closely with them every day, so didn't want to give the impression that they have been left out. They don't participate in these meetings. They certainly have been barred from doing so. I think that they are, it's more along the lines that they want the community to go ahead and have the conversation. But I know that the lieutenant and I do follow up on these meetings. He does watch them. They are recorded. So just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. I also, there's been some question about the cost of the consultants. The City Council authorized an expenditure of no more than $10,000 to be used for consultants, and the consultants, the cost of the consultants was $7,700. So, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I think that addressed the questions that I can answer at this point.
I believe there was also a question about negotiating the overhead that we are charged as contracting cities, which my understanding is non-negotiable, but I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that or if you have any more updated information on that based on your discussions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a good point. So the cost, for example, there was costs raised about how much a deputy sheriff might cost or a CSO or something like that, and why the total compensation cost is much higher. Salary is one part of an employee cost, but there are other costs associated with that. That might be health benefits. It would be retirement costs. It may be equipment for the employee. There's certainly some office needs, some of those kinds of things. So when you look at the total cost of an employee, which is what the sheriff has to charge us, because those employees have a cost associated with them, it's more than just salary. So I want to make sure that that's clear. And then the overhead that we get charged includes a lot of the services that the county provides that are not individual employee costs. For instance, some of the task force, the gang task force, excuse me, hazmat, some of those kinds of things that the county provides. Astria, which is kind of the air support that the Sheriff's Department has, those are additional overhead costs that are not associated with individual employees. So again, I know that that's a little complex and hard. One thing I'll say is that the Sheriff's Department, the Mayor Pro Tem is correct. We cannot negotiate the individual costs of each employee. What they take is an average cost of what it costs to have a sheriff deputy in the county, whether that's in the unincorporated area or one of the 9 cities that is served by the Sheriff's Department. And so we all pay the same amount, whether that's Imperial Beach, Lemon Grove, San Marcos, Solana Beach, Santee, Encinitas. I could go on all the cities, Del Mar, the cities that have the sheriff's contract. We all pay the same amount for personnel and overhead costs.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'd like to ask Andy and the consultants another question. Andy, would you mind paging back to the data tables? Because I think there was a good point raised there that we need to examine. Let's see, which one is it? The one that has doesn't have the more up-to-date information. Here it is, 2012, but let's go to the next one. This one is 2012. This one is 2000 to 2012, but excuse me, the bar chart goes to 2014. I think my question is, can we get more recent data for both of these charts? Is it available? These kinds of charts take a lot of effort to compile because they're typically different data sources to put them together. So they're not the kind of thing that you can get necessarily on an annual basis. But I would be very interested in us getting more recent data than these reflect. I don't challenge the general implication of these reports. I would be very surprised if there has been wholesale changes in the general trend shown by these reports. So I think they are useful in that regard, but it would be good if we had more recent data. And maybe one of our consultants or both of them have a comment on that.
Thank you for asking. As you talked about, it is compiled, right, over time, kind of semi-quasi longitudinal and from different sets of data. But I can definitely pull some more recent data. This was just a really good comprehensive look at the county as a whole, and then the breakdown with the cities, with Imperial Beach included, and then by race. And as one of the citizens talked about, showing the disproportionality was the most important thing that I really wanted to show when we talk about bias in the way that the justice system as a whole, as we saw, it's in killings, it's arrested, it's in who's incarcerated. And so it was really, really comprehensive as far as that. And so I could try to get more recent data. And if I can have an opportunity, I did want to also talk about, I wanted to thank the citizens, first of all, being able to have, again, those divergent views. And I think those are important, that we have these meetings, because it's an opportunity for us to learn. And this chart, and just like many other sources that we've all shared of accounts of things, we have to think about the things that are unreported and the way that data can be skewed or viewed or perceived. And so I think it is important to have conversations after looking at hard data. That was one of the things that I talked about a lot when we first started meeting. When we begin to extract data and extract opinions, ideas, and inferences from data, we have to think about the subjective and qualitative data that may or may not be reported. And so we can't draw a conclusion, an absolute correct, I agree with that, on what we've gathered as far as data. And so it's important, even down to the policies and the laws. I hear people talk about, when we talk about use of force, when we talk about resisting arrest, when we talk about the classification of hate crimes, and how they're reported, our reporting structures, those things need to be looked at. And they could have a major impact on how we come away from those particular things. And so thank you for bringing those up and being able to have the conversation and discussion around it. And just, I want to clarify as well, I put in the Black Lives Matter training, and it does need to be clarified. So thank you so much for that comment, that Black Lives Matter is an organization. It is also a decentralized movement. And so the organization is not what I was referring to, and I need to make that distinction, that I'm not referring to the organization itself that started due to police brutality, police shootings, killings of Black men. It has decentralized into a movement where by, it's been a call for people to recognize again what's on that chart, that Black people are being disproportionately affected in many ways, not just the justice system, but also social issues. And someone else talked about that. People having food security, people having quality of life, opportunities for employment, Black people. And so the Black Lives Matter movement is wanting equity for Black people and recognizing that there's so much inequity, disproportionately affected outcomes for them in our health and many other systems, as someone talked about, what's systemic and what's not. All of the many systems that Blacks and people of color have been affected by negatively. So when I talk about Black Lives Matter, I'm not referring to the organization, I'm referring to the decentralized movement and the recognition of the disproportionality that occurs in many of the systems and the social issues that I was bringing up earlier that are the underpinnings of what we're seeing, the symptoms, but that disease, the root, are the systems. And so thank you, Councilman Spriggs, for asking about more recent data. So I will try to do that, and maybe Mr. Gray can also help me out with that. Thank you.
I just want to make one more point about this. And yes, we do need, our whole quest here for everyone listening has been to gather as much data as we can on sheriff practices in Imperial Beach in order to implement the resolution of our city council setting up this law enforcement review committee and to look into the issues that the city council asked Mayor Pro Tem and I as the committee to look into. For various reasons, that has been a challenge. I wouldn't blame it on recalcitrance by the sheriff. There are data collection issues that I am very hopeful, and I think I speak for all of us, that we would like to see data collected on a more contract city basis as opposed to county-wide by the Sheriff's Department. This would enable every contract city to have a better idea of how law enforcement is being implemented in their particular community. It's not, and it's a positive thing. We as elected officials need to have that information so that we can be assured that practices are unbiased and appropriate for everybody in our community. And we have in Imperial Beach a majority minority community. The data shows that minorities are impacted significantly by law enforcement, more significantly by law enforcement. So in Imperial Beach particularly, we need to be aware of what is going on, and we need good data. Nobody's accusing the sheriff and the deputies in Imperial Beach of out of bounds behavior on a significant scale. That's not in this report, and that's not what we're saying. In fact, we added language reflecting the views that have been reflected in these meetings, that there's substantial support for sheriff services in Imperial Beach. And I think that includes almost everybody in Imperial Beach. And we all respect the professionalism of the sheriff, and there have been some shortfalls in that regard, and we want to make sure that those are minimized going forward. We wouldn't want to see anything happen in Imperial Beach that's happened in some other places. So for us to keep an eye on how sheriff services are provided in Imperial Beach and to have a perhaps more oversight than in the past is a way to protect our community, ensure sheriff services are great and continue to be great, and that everybody in Imperial Beach feels protected by the sheriff and our law enforcement resources. We're paying a substantial amount for those law enforcement resources. Taxpayers of every hue in Imperial Beach are paying for those services. So all taxpayers in Imperial Beach, including the majority minority of the people of Imperial Beach, need to feel protected and served equally by those services. So I think we are trying to be, we're trying to implement a mandate that was provided to us by the City Council. We're trying to be as data-driven as we can. That's challenging. We've tried to collect anecdotal information from those who have had experiences with the sheriff that indicate there's areas for improvement. There are always areas for improvement, and that's all that we're really trying to achieve here, is to make sure that we are able to pinpoint what those areas are and make some reasonable recommendations based on what we have learned through this process and what we've learned from what's going on in other communities and national standards as well. So I think that's pretty much I don't really need to make any more concluding statements than that. I thank everybody for participating. I really think that Mayor Pro Tem and I have tried to hear everybody and tried to be even-handed. That has been my inclination in the 10 years that I've been on the City Council. And I think that this report is a reflection of a great community process and the best possible job that we could do given the time frame that we had and given the limited access to hard data that was available. So thank everybody for your participation.
Thank you, Councilmember Spriggs. Very well said. I want to ask City Clerk Kelly if there's anybody who wishes to speak that has not spoken yet.
Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, we have 2 people with their hands raised, but they did speak previously.
Well, we'll go ahead and give them the opportunity to speak, and then we'll conclude the meeting. If no one else wants to go ahead and ask questions or give comment.
Okay, and so it's just Mr. Bruce Nichols and Leonard Miranda. So Bruce Nichols, you can go first. Please unmute yourself. Go ahead and speak, please.
Good morning. The racial discussion here disturbs me somewhat. I'm a 7-year inhabitant of Imperial Beach. I'm a retired Navy officer. Left Washington, D.C., several high-level positions, and came to Imperial Beach to fulfill my wife's desire to live near the beach. I've had discussions with Lieutenant Marquez at the station as I'm out walking my dog. If you've seen me around the neighborhood, you can't possibly miss me. Large black man, generally in Navy attire, walking a large Akita. I have in general been well received, as have my daughters. We're from a, what did you call it, a mixed ethnic background, mixed ethnic marriage. And I just don't feel that level of racism from the sheriff's deputies. I've actually experienced more, I wouldn't call it racism. I'd call it kind of bias, although I've had some really horrible names yelled at me from people in trucks going by. But I can't say that they were necessarily Imperial Beach residents. It disturbs me that we're having that level of discussion. There are people, though, that assume because they don't see that or they don't perceive that, that it isn't existent. You know, we're not a homogenous society. We don't all really love one another. We try to get by. And I commend everyone for saying what they feel and what they think, but you have to put yourself in other people's shoes on occasions. And sometimes resistance is not exactly what it appears to be. I mean, you can characterize it in any number of forms. Extensive military background, counterterrorism, and the rest of it. And so I know whereof I speak in that respect. I thank the committee members for what they've done and what they're doing and trying to do and will continue to do in service to this city. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And the last speaker is Mr. Leonard Miranda. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, listen, I'm going to go to the chart that was placed up there from 2002. Mr. Spriggs, I commend your effort to really try and get into the data and the information to get a clearer picture of what's going on. And the comments here have been well taken, I think, and I know there's varying perspectives. So I guess to reemphasize my very first point, I really think it would be fair, since there was some pretty balanced thoughts on this report itself, to clearly state in the report the city was pretty well divided, that we do not agree with many of the statements contained in that report. Going to the data mining, the statistic that showed the disproportionate effect upon blacks in our community with those shootings, data can be very well manipulated, and that might be an accurate data set. But another report you might want to look at is the disproportionate amount of violent crime that is committed by black persons. The data is out there. See, and that gets a reaction. And that's the thing that's the problem, is that there is data out there that says that 13% of the black population in the nation, 6%, which are black males, account for almost 50% of the violent crime. Now, that's a hard pill to swallow, but the data is out there. And so the issue is sometimes a cultural problem. People have tried to identify that maybe it's the hip hop, it's the culture of black. Learn about the Ferguson effect. Find out what happened in Ferguson after the police backed off because they were so paranoid to make a traffic stop on a black person. They actually retreated from that area and crime went through the roof. The black communities are asking for more police, and yet there's a narrative out there saying we don't need police. And that's not here. We're just somehow pulling data in from national sources, bringing it into here. And I think the testimony of the person who just said, he doesn't really feel it here, but there are these little microaggressions, and those are all real things. But I think you really have to data mine, and these forums are not at all appropriate to try and get into these deeper issues. So again, I commend the council. I commend Andy Hall for really being well balanced in his presentation of data and information. I think Mr. Spriggs has done a great job trying to drill into what's actually out there. I know he shared some anecdotal experiences he had that were in the 60s, and as a young college man, the mayor shared some of his experiences as a young man. But as I look back, again, I have to say that we've made great progress in this issue, but we can always make more. I guess the issue, again, is quantifying what our community is facing and quantifying what's out there nationwide, but again, more specific to our community. So with that, I'll close, and I thank you for the
time. Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, we received more commenters or more raised hands. There's a few that have already spoken, but there's one that has not spoken yet. Should we go straight to that person?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
That person, oops, sorry about that. The next speaker is Sean Ratliff. Please unmute yourself and begin.
All right, good morning, everybody. I just wanted to say how much I disagree with Mr. Miranda's viewpoints. I think this committee is doing an excellent service to our to Imperial Beach by trying to look at these different issues. Some of those comments that he made actually are blatantly offensive in the sense that he is insinuating that black people are more violent than white people. That data is just, I don't know where he's pulling that out of. And to the extent that it exists, I think it's just a symptom of the systematic ways in which black people in this country are not given a fair shake, and how, we see it everywhere. And I just want to support the notion that this report continue to God, I can't even, I'm so upset by what he just said that it's hard to even talk. Just know that there are a lot of people here in this town that support what you're doing on the council and support this ad hoc committee. And we appreciate the balanced viewpoint that you are trying to bring across. I have